Hey everyone, and welcome back to Standing in the Gaps. Today we're diving deep into the life of a man whose name is practically synonymous with the word gangster, Al Capone.
A figure who truly embodies the Roaring Twenties and Prohibition-era Chicago.
It's almost impossible to picture one without the other. We've got some great sources for you today. Newspaper articles from Capone's time, biographies, even some court transcripts. We're going to unpack the key moments that made Capone who he was, from his Brooklyn beginnings to his reign as Chicago's most notorious criminal and his ultimate downfall.
And it's crucial to understand the context of the time, the Roaring Twenties, the social upheaval, and of course Prohibition, which really fueled Capone's rise.
So let's start at the beginning. Capone's early life in Brooklyn paints a pretty vivid picture. Born to Italian immigrants in 1899, he had what some might call a rough start. Expelled from school at 14 for hating a teacher, involved in street gangs. Not exactly a recipe for a quiet life.
It was during those formative years that he met Johnny Torrio, a seasoned gangster who essentially became his mentor in the criminal underworld.
Oh, wow.
It's fascinating to see how Torrio shaped Capone's path, teaching him the tricks of the trade, so to speak.
This Torrio character definitely sounds like a fascinating figure in his own right. Almost like a dark Professor Higgins molding young Al into a criminal mastermind.
You can't talk about Capone without mentioning the nickname Scarface. It's not just a cool moniker. It speaks to his early days as a bouncer in New York. A brawl with a man named Frank Galucio led to that infamous slash across his face.
Makes you wonder if that scar contributed to his fearsome reputation, right? It's like something straight out of a movie.
Oh, sure.
And speaking of movies, Capone's story has certainly inspired his fair share of them. If you're enjoying our deep dive so far, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Standing in the Gaps for more fascinating stories like this.
Now, what's interesting is that Capone actually tried to go straight for a bit. He got married, started a family, even dabbled in bookkeeping in Baltimore. Seriously.
Talk about a surprising twist.
That's not exactly the image that springs to mind when you think Al Capone.
But the allure of the Chicago underworld proved too strong. With Torrio calling the shots, Capone was drawn back into the game.
Chicago in the 1920s was practically the Wild West of organized crime. Prohibition was in full swing.
Yes?
And with alcohol banned, that created a huge black market opportunity. Perfect conditions for a cunning gangster like Capone to rise to power.
Precisely. And rise he did. He joined the Colosimo mob, one of the most powerful gangs in Chicago. Stepping into that world, knowing the risks, and thriving in it.
Yep.
Thriving is putting it mildly. He quickly rose through the ranks, becoming Torrio's right-hand man. But I'm sure there were internal conflicts within the mob itself. Power struggles, betrayals, maybe even a few well-placed accidents.
You're absolutely right. The mob world was as treacherous as it was lucrative. And when Big Jim Colosimo, the head of the gang, met an untimely end in 1920, an event still shrouded in mystery, Torrio took over, with Capone at his side.
A classic power move. But I imagine not everyone was happy with this new leadership. There were rival gangs vying for control of the city, right?
You're thinking of the North Side Gang, led by George Bugs Moran. This rivalry between Capone and Moran would become legendary, culminating in one of the most shocking events in Chicago's history.
Oh, you mean the St. Valentine's Day Massacre?
Yes.
That's the kind of story that just sends chills down your spine. Even all these years later, 7 members of Moran's gang gunned down in a garage.
It was a terrible tragedy.
Cold, calculated brutality.
I agree.
It really solidified Capone's reputation as a ruthless force to be reckoned with.
And this event really gripped the nation's attention, too. Headlines across the country were dominated by the massacre, painting a picture of Capone's absolute power and the lawlessness that gripped Chicago. We'll dive into this a bit more in a little while, but first, are you enjoying our deep dive into Al Capone's world so far? Be sure to let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Standing in the Gaps for more fascinating historical explorations.
That's right.
Thanks.
We'll be right back after a short break.
I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Just kidding. This episode is sponsored by Movemaker. Looking to revolutionize the way you engage on Facebook? Meet Movemaker, the Chrome extension designed to turn your posts into engagement powerhouses. With Movemaker, you can easily add your products, links, and descriptions. It's like having a sales assistant right at your fingertips, helping you craft personalized, sales-oriented comments tailored to your audience. Imagine this. Someone comments on your post, and Movemaker instantly generates a reply, Customized, relevant, and designed to spark real conversations. Whether you're starting meaningful conversations, showcasing your expertise, or taking discussions to Messenger, MoveMaker gives you the tools to engage effectively and boost your sales. More engagement means more visibility. More visibility means more followers, appointments, and sales. MoveMaker isn't just a tool, it's your ultimate Facebook marketing partner. Ready to transform your Facebook strategy? Sign up for MoveMaker today and take the first step towards smarter, more impactful engagement. MoveMaker. Engage smarter. Sell better. Link in the description for more information.
The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was definitely a watershed moment.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just gang violence.
Right.
It was a brazen act of war that shocked the nation.
And I'm guessing the police weren't exactly thrilled with this whole situation.
No, they were not.
Did they ever try to put the brakes on Capone's empire?
They certainly tried,
Mm-hmm.
but Capone was incredibly shrewd. He had a vast network of corrupt officials on his payroll.
Wow.
From judges to police officers to politicians.
Yeah.
It was almost like he had the entire city in his pocket.
It's amazing how he was able to wield so much power,
Yeah.
not just through violence,
Right.
but also through this intricate web of influence.
Exactly. And that's what made him so difficult to catch.
Yeah.
He was always one step ahead, manipulating the system to his advantage.
You know, it's fascinating how Capone's story continues to capture our imagination all these years later.
Yeah.
He's become this larger-than-life figure, almost mythical.
He's certainly become an iconic figure, a
Yeah.
symbol of the gangster era.
Right.
But behind the legend, there was a real person, a complex individual shaped by his circumstances.
What aspects of Capone's character do you think often get overlooked when we talk about him?
Well, I think people sometimes underestimate his intelligence and business acumen.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a brute. He was a brilliant strategist who built a massive and incredibly profitable criminal empire.
Some estimates suggest his operation was pulling in over $100 million a year at its peak. That's an incredible amount of money, even by today's standards.
He achieved that through a combination of ruthlessness,
Right.
strategic thinking,
Uh-huh.
and a keen understanding of how to exploit the system.
He definitely had a knack for recognizing opportunities and capitalizing on them. Prohibition essentially handed him a golden ticket,
Yeah.
and he ran with it.
It's a dark side of entrepreneurial spirit, wouldn't you say? A talent for organization and leadership applied in a completely unethical way.
It makes you wonder what Capone could have achieved if he had channeled that energy into legitimate business ventures.
But it's also important to remember that Capone's story is inextricably linked to the social and economic conditions of his time. The poverty, the inequality,
Okay.
the limited opportunities for immigrants.
Right.
These factors all contributed to his rise.
So, in a way, he was a product of his environment.
To some extent, yes.
Okay.
But that doesn't excuse his actions.
Right.
He made choices that resulted in immense suffering for others.
And speaking of suffering, let's not forget the sheer scope of Capone's criminal activities.
Yeah.
Bootlegging was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
He was involved in gambling,
Uh-huh.
prostitution,
Yeah.
racketeering, a whole network of illegal enterprises.
He was essentially running a massive underground corporation with a complex hierarchy,
Right.
divisions of labor,
Mhm.
and even a code of conduct, albeit a twisted one.
It's almost like a dark parody of legitimate business practices, isn't it?
Exactly. And his success relied on instilling fear and maintaining control through violence.
Yeah.
The St. Valentine's Day Massacre wasn't just about eliminating rivals. It was
Right.
about sending a message,
Yeah.
a terrifying message, to anyone who dared to challenge his authority.
Speaking of terrifying messages, I've always been intrigued by the story of Elliot Ness and his team of untouchables. They were like the real-life good guys going up against a seemingly invincible criminal mastermind.
Absolutely.
What can you tell us about their efforts to bring Capone down?
The Untouchables were a special unit of Prohibition agents assembled by Ness specifically to target Capone's organization. They were chosen for their honesty and incorruptibility,
Wow.
a direct counter to the widespread corruption that protected Capone.
So they were basically the incorruptible force going up against the immovable object. That must have been an incredible clash of wills.
It was. They were relentless in their pursuit of Capone,
Uh-uh.
raiding his breweries,
Aw.
disrupting his supply chains,
Oh,
and
no.
chipping away at his profits.
But did they ever manage to put a real dent in his operation?
They certainly caused him some headaches and financial setbacks.
Okay.
But Capone was always one step ahead. He had a network of informants who tipped him off to raids, and he had corrupt officials who turned a blind eye to his activities.
So it was a constant cat and mouse game.
Exactly. And for a long time, Capone seemed untouchable.
Right.
He had evaded countless attempts to bring him down,
Wow.
leaving many to wonder if he was truly invincible.
It's amazing to think about the resources he had at his disposal.
Yeah.
The money,
Yeah.
the connections, the sheer manpower.
I know.
It's no wonder he was able to stay ahead of the law for so long.
But even the most powerful empires eventually crumble,
Yeah.
and Capone's was no exception.
Right.
His downfall would come not from bullets or raids, but from a seemingly mundane source: taxes.
Wait, taxes? Seriously?
It might sound unbelievable, but it's true.
Wow.
In 1931, Capone was indicted and convicted not for murder, racketeering, or any of his other violent crimes,
Right.
but for tax evasion.
That's an incredible twist.
Well, it turns out that even criminal masterminds need to keep records.
Okay.
And Capone, despite his meticulous efforts to hide his income, had made some crucial mistakes.
His obsession with control and meticulous record keeping ultimately led to his undoing. That's quite a paradox.
And it's a reminder that even the most cunning criminals can't escape the long arm of the law, or in this case, the IRS.
It's like the old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Exactly.
And in Capone's case, the fall was from a seemingly untouchable position of power.
It was.
Before we continue, I want to remind our listeners to hit that like button and subscribe to Standing in the Gaps if you're enjoying our deep dive into the life of Al Capone.
Absolutely.
And be sure to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. It's almost poetic justice, isn't it?
It is.
The guy who evaded law enforcement for years,
Right.
who built an empire on illegal activities,
Yeah.
was ultimately brought down by something as seemingly ordinary as taxes.
It's a reminder that even in a world of violence and corruption,
Right.
the rules still apply.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most unexpected things can bring down even the most powerful figures.
So what happened to Capone after his conviction? Did he spend the rest of his days behind bars?
He was initially sent to Atlanta Penitentiary,
Okay.
but later transferred to the infamous Alcatraz, a maximum security prison on an island in San Francisco Bay. His time in prison wasn't exactly a walk in the park either.
Alcatraz was known for its harsh conditions and notorious inmates. What was Capone's life like during his incarceration?
He wasn't exactly treated like a kingpin anymore. He had to follow the same rules as any other inmate,
Yeah.
and he lost all the privileges and power he had on the outside.
It must have been a huge adjustment, going from a life of luxury and control to the confines of a prison cell. Did he ever try to escape or regain any of his former influence?
There's no evidence of any escape attempts.
Okay.
And his influence on the outside dwindled significantly.
Right.
His empire crumbled without his leadership, and his loyal associates, sensing weakness,
Oh, wow.
turned on him.
It's a classic tale of rise and fall, isn't it? The higher you climb, the farther you have to fall. And Capone's fall was as dramatic as his rise.
Oh, yeah?
But it wasn't just the prison walls that confined him.
Right.
His health also began to deteriorate.
Yes, it did.
What caused his health to decline so drastically?
While the stress of prison life surely didn't help,
Right.
Capone's health was primarily affected by syphilis, a disease he had contracted earlier in life. In Alcatraz, his condition worsened, leading to dementia and other complications.
So even the mighty Al Capone,
Yeah.
who seemed invincible at the height of his power,
Right.
was ultimately brought low by a combination of legal troubles and failing health. It's a reminder that even the most notorious figures are still human,
Yes.
subject to the same vulnerabilities as everyone else.
It certainly puts his story in a different light, doesn't it?
It does.
It strips away the myth and reveals the human being beneath the legend.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles and larger-than-life figures.
Right.
It's about the choices people made,
Yes.
the circumstances they faced, and the consequences that followed.
And those consequences often ripple outward, affecting not just individuals, but entire societies.
Right.
Capone's story, for example, had a profound impact on Chicago, shaping its image, its politics, and its culture for decades to come.
Before we wrap up our deep dive into Al Capone's world,
Yes.
I want to get your take on his legacy. How should we remember him? As a ruthless criminal, a brilliant strategist, a product of his time, or perhaps all of the above?
It's a complex question, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
He was undoubtedly a ruthless criminal,
Yeah.
responsible for countless acts of violence and suffering.
Right.
But he was also a product of his environment,
Correct.
a man who rose to power in a time of social and economic upheaval,
Right.
when opportunities for advancement were limited, especially for immigrants.
It's important to acknowledge both the good and the bad, the complexities and contradictions that make up a person's life. We can learn from Capone's story, both from his successes and his failures, without condoning his criminal acts. History is full of flawed individuals who made both positive and negative contributions to the world.
Yes, it is.
And it's our responsibility to learn from their experiences,
Right.
to understand the forces that shape their lives, and to use that knowledge to build a better future.
Well said.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our exploration of Al Capone's life and legacy.
I agree.
Thanks for listening to Standing in the Gaps.
Be sure to check out our GoFundMe in the show notes.
We'll be back for another deep dive.
See you then.